Ethan Miller had always felt like a quiet shadow in Redwood High, moving through crowded hallways with his head down, hoping no one noticed how unsure he often felt, and though he kept his distance from everyone, he admired Ms. Claire Donovan, his English teacher, because she spoke to her students as if their thoughts mattered, something Ethan rarely felt in his life. So when she asked him one Tuesday afternoon, "Can you stay after class for a moment?" he assumed he had done something wrong. And on his slow walk to her desk he prepared apologies in his mind, imagining she would mention a missed assignment or a weak essay, but the moment the classroom emptied and he stood alone in front of her desk, he saw something unexpected in her expression, gentle concern instead of strict judgment, and she quietly told him she had read his recent essay about feeling lost, adding that she wanted to make sure he was okay, and her voice softened in a way that made Ethan freeze because no adult had ever asked him that with real care before. He tried to respond, but his thoughts were tangled, surprised that she had noticed details he thought he had well, and as he stood there, the room suddenly felt smaller, quieter, as if time had slowed just for the two of them, and he noticed how her kindness felt warm rather than formal, how she spoke like someone who genuinely wanted to understand him, not just a teacher doing her job, and in that brief silence Ethan felt something shift deep inside him, a strange mixture of relief and confusion. As if her words touched a place he never allowed anyone to see. He looked at her, trying to figure out why her concern meant so much, why her voice made him feel seen for the first time in months, and as the last traces of footsteps faded in the hallway and the classroom door clicked shut behind the final student, the atmosphere between them changed gently, not in a dramatic way but in a human, quiet way, as if they were both aware of an unspoken connection they hadn't expected. Ethan realized this conversation wasn't about homework at all but about him as a person, about his emotions and the things he hid behind his calm face, and though he didn't know how to explain the sudden heaviness in his chest, he felt grateful that someone, especially someone he respected as deeply as Ms. Donovan, had noticed what even his friends and family overlooked. She encouraged him to talk if he wanted to, reassuring him that his feelings mattered, and he nodded, though he wasn't sure what to say, because the truth was that he had been carrying loneliness for so long that he didn't know how to share it, but her gentle patience made him feel like maybe he could try. The sunlight from the window stretched across the desks, turning the classroom into a quiet, warm space that felt separate from the rest of the noisy school, and for the first time, Ethan found himself wishing the conversation wouldn't end quickly, not because he needed help with homework but because talking to her felt strangely safe in a way he hadn't expected at all. He noticed the slight worry in her eyes and realized she wasn't just checking on his academic performance but genuinely cared about his well-being, and that unexpected kindness stayed with him long after he left the room. He walked out feeling lighter yet confused, aware that this moment would stay in his memory longer than he wanted to admit, and as he stepped into the hallway, he kept replaying her words in his mind, wondering why a simple conversation felt so significant and why her voice kept echoing inside him as if it had awakened something he hadn't felt in a long time. Something inside him quietly whispered that this was the beginning of a change he didn't fully understand yet, a shift in his heart that made him realize that sometimes the people who notice you unexpectedly become the people who change you, even if nothing dramatic happens, even if everything stays respectful and proper, because emotional connections often start in the smallest, softest moments, like this one, when a teacher simply asks a student if he is okay and means it. Ethan didn't know what the future held, but as he walked home that day, he felt more alive than he had in months, sensing that whatever had happened between them in that quiet classroom was going to shape the days ahead in ways he couldn't yet explain, and though he wasn't sure why, he couldn't shake the feeling that Ms. Donovan's concern had opened a door inside him that had been closed for too long, a door he wasn't ready to close again. In the days after their first real conversation, Ethan found himself looking at life differently, because Ms. Donovan's gentle concern had opened something inside him that he wasn't used to sharing, and although he tried to stay focused on classes, he kept noticing how her presence brought a strange sense of calm to his chaotic thoughts. She never treated him differently from other students, yet their conversations after class became more natural, honest, and surprisingly comforting, and each time she asked about his writing, her voice carried a warmth that made him feel understood in a way he had never experienced. So he began writing more, not for grades but because he knew she would actually read his words with care, and that alone made him want to open up more than he meant to. As days turned into weeks, they built a quiet rhythm, never crossing boundaries, never stepping beyond what was respectful, but still forming a connection that felt deeper than ordinary teacher-student interactions, a connection shaped by shared trust and the unspoken understanding that some people simply recognize parts of you that others miss. Ethan started staying behind after class more often, pretending to ask questions about assignments but really because talking to her made him feel lighter, and she usually sensed what he needed without him explaining much, offering small encouragements that stayed with him long after school ended. She admired his honesty when he talked about the pressure he felt to hide his emotions, and he admired how she carried herself with calm strength even on days when she seemed tired or overwhelmed, and though he never said it out loud, he could tell that she too found comfort in their conversations because her expression softened every time he walked up to her desk. The connection between them grew slowly, naturally, like two people understanding each other without ever saying it directly, and though it wasn't romantic in any inappropriate way, it carried a gentle emotional pull, the kind that happens when two hearts recognize a familiar loneliness in each other. One rainy afternoon, when the hallway was nearly empty and the library felt like the quietest place in the whole school, Ethan sat alone trying to finish a poem but couldn't find the right words, and when Ms. Donovan walked by and noticed him, she sat across from him with a calm smile, saying softly, "You write like someone who feels deeply," and her voice held a mix of encouragement and understanding that made his chest tighten because it felt like she saw everything he was trying to hide. She didn't touch him, didn't break any rules, but her kindness felt close in a way that almost made him forget how alone he usually felt, and Ethan realized this gentle closeness was becoming something he thought about more than he intended to, not in a childish crush way but as a deep emotional connection that made him wish life was simpler. He admired her maturity, her patience, her ability to read people without judging them, and he found himself wanting to be someone she would be proud of, someone who didn't disappear into the background anymore. She encouraged him to keep writing, to trust himself, to believe he had something meaningful to offer the world, and every word she spoke seemed to strengthen something in him that had been fragile for years. Still, even with the growing closeness, they both kept a careful balance, always aware of the boundary between student and teacher, making sure nothing they said or did could be misunderstood. Yet the emotional weight between them grew with every quiet moment they shared, every lingering conversation, every soft smile exchanged when no one else was watching. Ethan often wondered why her presence made his heartbeat feel louder, why her reassurance stayed in his mind long after the school bell rang, and why he felt a strange mix of gratitude and confusion every time she encouraged him. But he knew it wasn't something dangerous or inappropriate. It was simply the powerful feeling of being seen, respected, and understood at a time in life when he desperately needed it. He caught himself imagining how different his high school years would have been if she hadn't reached out that first day, and the thought made him feel a warm ache he didn't fully understand, a bittersweet sense that he was experiencing something rare and delicate. As spring approached, Ethan sensed that their time together was temporary, tied to the walls of Redwood High, and the awareness made their conversations feel even more meaningful, like moments he wanted to hold on to for as long as he could. He didn't say it out loud, but part of him feared the day he would walk out of her classroom for the last time, not because he wanted anything inappropriate but because the emotional connection they shared had become a quiet anchor in his life. Ms. Donovan seemed to sense his growing attachment, and while she remained professional and careful, there were moments, short glances, soft pauses, when her eyes revealed that she too felt the weight of this connection, not as a secret affection but as a deep understanding that some people enter our lives only for a chapter, yet they leave a permanent mark. Their bond wasn't dramatic or exaggerated, but real, human, and fragile, shaped by unspoken emotions, mutual respect, and the simple truth that sometimes two people can feel connected even when they know the world around them will never let that connection go further. And as Ethan gathered his books one afternoon, he realized that whatever was forming between them, quiet, kind, and bittersweet, was going to shape him far beyond his time in high school. Even if he never found the right words to tell her, spring had arrived at Redwood High, filling the campus with the scent of blooming flowers and long afternoons that stretched lazily through the classrooms. Yet inside Ethan Miller, the days felt heavier because graduation was approaching, and with it, the thought of leaving behind not just his school, but the quiet connection he had built with Ms. Claire Donovan, a connection that had grown slowly, gently, like a fragile flower he didn't want to let fade. and even though he tried to focus on finishing his senior projects and preparing for exams, he found his thoughts constantly drifting to her words, the calm reassurance in her voice, and the way she had encouraged him to believe in himself when he doubted his own abilities. One evening, after the school's literary showcase had ended and the halls were mostly empty except for the janitors tidying up and the soft echoes of distant conversations, Ethan lingered in his classroom, gathering his notes and books, unsure why he couldn't bring himself to leave, and then she walked in, her figure outlined by the golden light of the setting sun streaming through the windows, and suddenly the empty room felt warmer, softer, and more intimate without either of them fully acknowledging why. And when she said his name, Ethan, with a quiet smile that carried pride and care, his chest tightened in a way that surprised him, because it wasn't about romance or desire but about a deep, human longing to be seen and understood. "I'm proud of you," she said, and even though the words were simple, they held weight, carrying months of encouragement, attention, and subtle understanding that neither of them had named aloud but both had felt, and he struggled to find words to reply, because how do you respond to someone who has quietly changed the way you see yourself without ever crossing a line? He managed to say, I'm really going to miss this place," and she nodded, understanding more than he could ever explain, as though she too was feeling the bittersweet ache of endings and transitions, knowing that some connections exist only for certain times in life, yet they shape you forever. For a long moment, they just stood there, not touching, not stepping closer, but feeling everything in that silent space between them, the emotional pull that had grown over weeks of careful conversations and shared understanding, and Ethan realized that what he felt for her wasn't a fleeting crush or inappropriate attraction, but the profound effect of someone recognizing his worth and treating him with kindness, respect, and subtle admiration that he had never known before. He wanted to say thank you for noticing him, for seeing the parts of him he kept hidden. And she wanted to tell him that students like him leave a mark on teachers' hearts too, but before either could speak, a knock at the door reminded them of reality, another teacher calling her, and the magical moment shattered, leaving Ethan with a mix of longing, gratitude, and confusion swirling in his chest. As he left the classroom, the warmth of the sunlight fading behind him, he felt the ache of knowing that this was temporary, that soon graduation would pull them apart, and yet the memory of standing in that sunlit room, hearing her voice, and feeling quietly understood, would remain with him, a private treasure he could carry for years. On the walk home, he replayed her words over and over, feeling the subtle power of emotional connections that need no drama to be unforgettable, understanding that sometimes love, or the closest thing to it, exists not in bold gestures but in small, quiet moments of attention, care, and genuine recognition, and though he hadn't touched her hand, she hadn't held his gaze too long. The impact of her presence was far deeper than any physical interaction could ever be, shaping the way he viewed himself and the world around him. He remembered the long afternoons in the library, the after-class conversations about writing, the soft encouragements whispered across desks, and the way she seemed to know exactly what to say when his confidence faltered, and he realized that the most profound connections often arrive in the smallest forms, quietly, gently, and leave marks that last a lifetime, because they awaken something in you that nothing else can. He thought about how bittersweet life could be, that sometimes the right people enter your life at the wrong time, and that even the strongest emotional bonds cannot always continue in the way your heart might wish, but that didn't make them any less real, or any less significant, and Ethan felt a quiet acceptance forming within him, a readiness to treasure the time he had with her while it lasted, knowing he could never replicate this feeling but could always carry it as a source of strength. As the sun finally dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Ethan walked out of the school, a mixture of hope, longing, and heartache filling his chest, realizing that some of life's most powerful moments are the ones that cannot be held on to forever, yet leave an imprint on your soul, shaping the person you are becoming. And he knew that the emotional connection he shared with Ms. Donovan, delicate, respectful, and quietly transformative, was exactly that kind of moment, one that would echo in his memory long after the last page of his high school story had been written. Graduation day arrived at Redwood High with bright sunshine, cheerful laughter, and the excited buzz of students celebrating the end of a chapter in their lives. Yet for Ethan Miller, the day carried a quiet, bittersweet weight because he knew it would be the last time he would see Ms. Claire Donovan in the hallways where their unspoken connection had quietly grown, and as he weaved through crowds of friends, families, and fellow graduates. His eyes searched instinctively for her calm, familiar face, and when he finally spotted her approaching with a warm smile, a soft wave, and that same gentle pride he had come to rely on, his chest tightened in a way that made his heartbeat feel louder, as if all the months of quiet conversations, shared understanding, and subtle emotional closeness were culminating in this single, fleeting moment. She handed him a small envelope, her fingers brushing the edge lightly as she said, "For when you feel lost again," and though her words were simple, they carried the depth of months of care, guidance, and emotional investment that neither of them had crossed boundaries to explore, yet the gesture felt intimate and profoundly meaningful to Ethan, who clutched it with a mixture of gratitude and quiet longing, knowing that it represented far more than a teacher's encouragement. It was a token of understanding, a bridge to the part of him she had helped nurture. Later that evening, in the solitude of his room, he carefully opened the envelope and found a handwritten note in her flowing, careful handwriting that said, "Your voice matters. Your heart matters. Keep writing, Ethan. And remember, some connections are meant to guide us, not stay with us. But that doesn't make them any less real." And as he read and reread the words, he felt a wave of warmth, sadness, and clarity because the note acknowledged the truth of their bond without stepping over any boundaries, honoring both their emotions while preserving respect. And he realized that this was exactly what had been happening all along. She hadn't crossed lines, she hadn't encouraged anything inappropriate, yet she had recognized his worth, validated his feelings, and given him a gift of confidence and emotional growth that no classroom lecture could ever achieve. He sat quietly, absorbing the weight of the gesture, feeling both the joy of being seen and the ache of knowing that their connection had a time limit, that life would soon pull him into new chapters where they would not cross paths as they had, yet the imprint of her care would remain permanent, shaping his outlook on relationships, empathy, and emotional honesty. Months and even years later, when Ethan became a published author, he didn't name her in a dedication, but in the margin of his first book, he wrote a line only she would understand: "Thank you to the person who taught me that some feelings don't need to be acted on to be unforgettable." And that line captured everything: how she had touched his heart, guided him gently, and left a mark that was powerful precisely because it had been restrained, respectful, and profoundly human. Ethan reflected on all their quiet interactions, the afternoons spent in the library, the after-class conversations about writing, the subtle smiles, the soft encouragements, the moments where her eyes seemed to understand more than his words could express, and he realized that some of life's most meaningful connections are not defined by romance or drama but by emotional depth, guidance, and the rare experience of being truly seen by another person. He understood now that love or deep emotional attachment doesn't always need to result in a relationship, and that the bond he shared with Ms. Donovan was a perfect example. It had been real, transformative, and unforgettable, not because it had been physical or conventional, but because it had nurtured his confidence, his heart, and his ability to connect with others in a more honest way. In the quiet of his room, he felt a mixture of gratitude and longing, knowing he had experienced something rare and beautiful that had already begun to shape the person he would become, a gentle reminder that sometimes life offers us the right people at the right time to guide us emotionally, to open doors we didn't know existed, and then lets us continue forward without them, leaving us stronger, wiser, and more aware of our own capacity for connection. The memory of her smile, her encouraging words, the way she had seen his potential before he saw it himself, and the soft reassurance in her voice remained vivid in his mind, a constant inspiration as he moved into adulthood, reminding him that some bonds, though temporary, are meant to last a lifetime in our hearts, and that respect, care, and emotional honesty can create the most meaningful relationships, even if they never fit the usual definitions of love or attachment. Ethan knew that their connection had been a turning point, teaching him patience, emotional awareness, and the quiet power of being seen, and he held on to the note, rereading her words whenever he felt uncertain or lost, understanding that her message was not just about guidance in writing but about navigating life with courage, empathy, and self-belief. He reflected on how delicate their bond had been, how it had grown slowly, carefully, and respectfully, and how the moments they shared, though small, quiet, and fleeting, had altered the course of his emotional world forever, giving him the ability to appreciate the subtle beauty of human connection, the importance of boundaries, and the profound impact that a single person can have when they choose to notice, support, and believe in another without expecting anything in return. In the end, Ethan realized that Ms. Donovan didn't just teach him English, essays, or poetry, she had taught him about life, empathy, and the quiet strength of meaningful, respectful connections, and that lesson would stay with him as long as he lived, a gentle, enduring reminder that sometimes the right person arrives at the right time, not to stay forever, but to guide us, inspire us, and leave an unforgettable imprint on our hearts.